Oh, no. What would there be? You know these little provincial news sheets are wretched affairs. Oh, are they? Papa and Mamma always take it in. He reddened again. Oh, well, you see, I always read it too, because I can't get anything else. But it is not very thrilling to hear that so-and-so, the merchant prince, is about to celebrate his silver wedding. Yes, you laugh, but you ought to read other papers. The Königsberg Gazette, for instance, or the Rhenish Gazette. You'd find a different story there entirely. There, it's what the King of Prussia says. What does he say? Well, I really couldn't repeat it to a lady. He got red again. He expressed himself rather strongly on the subject of this same press. He went on with another cynical laugh, which for a moment made a painful impression on Tony. The press, you know, doesn't feel any too friendly toward the government, or the nobility, or the parsons and junkers. It knows pretty well how to lead the censor by the nose. Well, and you? Aren't you any too friendly with the nobility either? I? He asked and looked very embarrassed. Tony rose. Shall we talk about this again another time? She suggested. Suppose I go down to the beach now. Look, the sky is blue nearly all over. It won't rain any more. I am simply longing to jump into the water. Will you go down with me? Chapter 7. She had put on her big straw hat, and she raised her sunshade, for it was very hot, though there was a little sea breeze. Young Schwarzkopf, in his gray felt, book in hand, walked beside her and sometimes gave her a shy side glance. They went along the front and walked through the garden of the Kurhaus, which lay there in the sun, shadeless and still, with its rose bushes and pebbly paths. The music pavilion, hidden among pine trees, stood opposite the Kurhaus, the pastry cook's, and the 2 Swiss cottages, which were connected by a long gallery. It was about 11:30, and the hotel guests were probably down on the beach. They crossed the playground, where there were many benches and a large swing, passed close to the building where one took the hot baths, and strolled slowly across the Lichtenfeld. The sun brooded over the grass, and there rose up a spicy smell from the warm weeds and clover. Blue bottleflies buzzed and droned about. A dull, booming roar came up from the ocean, whose waters now and then lifted a crested head of spray in the distance. "What is that you are reading?" Tony asked. The young man took the book in both hands and ran it quickly through, from cover to cover. "Oh, that is nothing for you, Fraulein Buddenbrook. Nothing but blood and entrails and such awful things. This part treats of nodes in the lungs, what we call pulmonary catarrh. The lungs get filled up with a watery fluid. It is a very dangerous condition and occurs in inflammation of the lungs. In bad cases, the patient simply chokes to death, and that is all described with perfect coolness from a scientific point of view." "Oh, horrors! But if one wants to be a doctor, I will see that you become our family physician when old Gerbeau retires. You'll see." "Ha ha! And what are you reading, if I may ask, Fraulein Buddenbrook?" "Do you know Hoffmann?" Tony asked. "About the choirmaster and the gold pot? Yes, that's very pretty. But it is more for ladies. Men want something different, you know." "I must ask you one thing," Tony said, taking a sudden resolution after they had gone a few steps. "And that is, do, I beg of you, tell me your first name. I haven't been able to understand it a single time I've heard it, and it is making me dreadfully nervous. I've simply been racking my brains. I have, quite." "You have been racking your brains?" "No, don't make it worse. I'm sure it couldn't have been proper for me to ask, only I'm naturally curious. There's really no reason whatever why I should know. Why, my name is Morton, he said, and he became redder than ever. Morton? That is a nice name. Oh, nice? Yes, indeed. At least it's prettier than to be called something like Hins or Coons. It is unusual. It sounds foreign. You are romantic, Fraulein Buddenbrook. You have read too much Hoffmann. My grandfather was half Norwegian, and I was named after him. That is all there is to it. Tony picked her way through the rushes on the edge of the beach. In front of them was a row of round-topped wooden pavilions, and beyond they could see the basket chairs at the water's edge, and people camped by families on the warm sand, ladies with blue sun spectacles and books out of the lone library, gentlemen in light suits idly drawing pictures in the sand with their walking sticks, sunburnt children in enormous straw hats tumbling about, shoveling sand, digging for water, baking with wooden molds, paddling bare-legged in the shadow pools, floating little ships. To the right, the wooden bathing pavilion ran out into the water. "We're going straight across to Mollendorf's pier," said Tony. "Let's turn off." "Certainly. But don't you want to meet your friends? I can sit down yonder on those boulders." "Well, I suppose I ought to just greet them, but I don't want to, you know. I came here to be in peace and quiet." "Peace? From what?" "Why, from... Listen, Frau Buddenbrook, I must ask you something. No, I'll wait till another day, till we have more time. Now I will say goodbye and go sit down there on the rocks." "Don't you want me to introduce you then?" Tony asked importantly. "Oh no," Morton said hastily. "Thanks, but I don't fit very well with those people, you see. I'll just sit down over there on the rocks." It was rather large company which Tony was approaching, while Morton Schwarzkopf betook himself to the great heap of boulders on the right, near to the bathing house and washed by the waves. The party was encamped before the Mollendorf's pier, and was composed of the Mollendorf, Hagenstrom, Kirstenmaker, and Fritsch families. Except for Herr Fritsch, the owner, from Hamburg, and Peter Dolman, the idler, the group consisted of women, for it was a weekday, and most of the men were in their offices. Consul Fritsch, an elderly, smooth-shaven gentleman with a distinguished face, was up on the open pier, busy with a telescope, which he trained upon a sailboat visible in the distance. Peter Dolman, with a broad-brimmed straw hat and a beard with a nautical cut, stood chatting with the ladies perched on camp stools or stretched out on rugs on the sand. There was Frau Senator Mollendorf, born Langhals, with her long-handled lorgnon and untidy gray hair. Frau Hagenstorm, with Julchen, who had not grown much, but already wore diamonds in her ears like her mother, Frau Consul Kistenmaker and her daughters, and Frau Consul Fritsch, a wrinkled little lady in a cap, who performed the duties of hospitality at the bath and went about perpetually hot and tired, thinking only about balls and routs and raffles, children's parties and sailboat excursions. At a little distance sat her paid companion. Kistenmaker and Son was the new firm of wine merchants which had, in the last few years, managed to put C.F. Koppen rather in the shade. The two sons, Edward and Stephen, worked in their father's office. Consul Dolman possessed none of those graces of manner upon which Justus Kroger laid such stress. He was an idler pure and simple, whose special characteristic was a sort of rough good humor. He could and did take a good many liberties in society, being quite aware that his loud, brusque voice and bluff ways caused the ladies to set him down as an original. once at a dinner at the Buddenbrooks, when a course failed to come in promptly, and the guests grew dull and the hostess flustered, he came to the rescue and put them into good humor by bellowing in his big voice the whole length of the table. "Please don't wait for me, Frau Consul." Just now, in this same reverberating voice, he was relating questionable anecdotes seasoned with Low German idioms. Frau Senator Mollendorf, in paroxysms of laughter, was crying out over and over again, "Stop, Herr Dolman, stop, for heaven's sake. Don't tell any more." They greeted Tony, the Hagenstroms coldly, the others with great cordiality. Consul Fritsch even came down the steps of the pier, for he hoped that the Buddenbrooks would return next year to swell the population of the baths. "Yours to command, Fraulein Buddenbrook," said Consul Dolman, with his very best pronunciation, for he was aware that Mademoiselle did not especially care for his manners. "Mademoiselle Buddenbrook, you here? How lovely! When did you come? What a sweet frock! Where are you stopping? At the Schwarzkopf's? With the pilot captain? How original! How frightfully original!" These are all, I think, they're all separate paragraphs and separate quotation marks, so it's probably the whole group of them talking to her saying these things, which is cute. "You're stopping in the town?" asked Consul Frisch, the owner of the baths. He did not betray that he felt the blow. "Will you come to our next assembly?" his wife asked. "Oh, you are only here for a short time?" This from another lady. "Don't you think, darling, the Buddenbrooks rather give themselves airs?" Frau Hagenstrom whispered to Frau Senator Mollendorf. "Have you been in yet?" somebody asked. "Which of the rest of you hasn't bathed yet, young ladies? Marie, Julie, Louise? Your friends will go bathing with you, of course, Fraulein Antony." Some of the young girls rose, and Peter Dolman insisted on accompanying them up the beach. "Do you remember how we used to go back and forth to school together?" Tony asked Julie Hagenstrom. "Yes, and you were always the one that got into mischief," Julie said, joining in her laugh. They went across the beach on a footbridge made of a few boards and reached the bathhouse. As they passed the boulders where Morton Schwarzkopf sat, Tony nodded to him from a distance, and somebody asked, "Who is that you are bowing to, Tony?" "That was young Schwarzkopf," Tony answered. "He walked down here with me." "The son of the pilot captain?" Julchen asked, and peered across at Morton with her staring black eyes. He, on his side, watched the gay troop with rather a melancholy air. Tony said in a loud voice, "What a pity August is not here. It must be stupid on the beach." Chapter 8. And now began for Tony Buddenbrook a stretch of beautiful summer weeks, briefer, lovelier than any she had ever spent in Travemünde. She bloomed as she felt her burden no longer upon her. Her gay, pert, careless manner had come back. The consul looked at her with satisfaction when he came on Sundays with Tom and Christian. On those days they ate at the table d'hôte, sat under the awnings at the pastry cook's, drinking coffee and listening to the band, and peeped into the roulette room at the gay folk there, like Justus Kroger and Peter Dolman. The consul himself never played. Tony sunned herself, took baths, ate sausages with ginger nut sauce, and took long walks with Morton. They went out on the high road to the next village, or along the beach to the Ocean Temple on its height, whence a wide view was to be had over land and sea, or to the woods behind the Kerr house, where was a great bell used to call the guests to the table d'hôte. Sometimes they rode across the Trave to the Preval to look for amber. Morton made an entertaining companion, though his opinions were often dogmatic, not to say heated. He had a severe and righteous judgment for everything, and he expressed it with finality, blushing all the time. It saddened Tony to hear him call the nobility idiots and wretches, and to see the contemptuous, if awkward, gesture that accompanied the words. She scolded him, but she was proud to have him express so freely in her presence the views and opinions which she knew he concealed from his parents. Once he confided in her, "I'll tell you something. I've a skeleton in my room at Göttingen, a whole set of bones, you know, held together by wire. I've put an old policeman's uniform on it." Isn't that great? He laughed, not me. Ha ha. But don't say anything to my father. To my father about it. Something just dropped in my house. Pause. It's been hot here, so a decoration that was just held up by tape fell off. Okay. Shit, I forgot where I was. Hold on. Okay, I got it. Tony was naturally often in the society of her town friends, or drawn into some assembly or boating party. Then Morton sat on the rocks, and after their first day this phrase became a convenient one. To sit on the rocks meant to feel bored and lonely. When a rainy day came, and a gray mist covered the sea far and wide till it was one with the deep sky, when the beach was drenched and the roads steaming with wet, Tony would say, "Today we shall both have to sit on the rocks, that is, in the veranda or sitting room. There is nothing left to do but for you to play me some of your student songs, Morton, even if they do bore me horribly." "Yes," Morton said, "come and sit down. But you know that when you are here, there are no rocks." He never said such things when his father was present. His mother he did not mind. You know what? Okay, side note here. This is so romantic how they're flirting, like even the language. Nowadays, dudes are just like, "Hey, let me get your number. Hey, are you single? Hey, you look good. Well, I'm a lesbian. I'm a lesbian too. I like girls." Bro, where's the romance? God. Except I guess the romance has to come with your parents forcing you to marry someone you don't like. Let's evolve as a society and have the romance and the freedom. There are no rocks when you're here. Oh my God, wait, let me highlight this because it's so cute. Okay. "Well, what now?" asked the pilot captain, as Tony and Morton both rose from table and were about to take their leave. "Where are the young folk off to?" "I was going to take a little walk with Fraulein Antony, as far as the temple." "Oh, is that it? Well, my son Phileas, what do you say to going up to your room and conning over your nerves? You'll lose everything out of your head before you get back to Göttingen." But Frau Schwarzkopf would intervene. "Now, Dietrich, aren't these his holidays? Why shouldn't he take a walk? Is he to have nothing of our visitor?" So Morton went. They paced along the beach close to the water, on the smooth, hard sand that made walking easy. It was strewn with common, tiny white mussel shells, and others too, pale opalescent and longish in shape, yellow, green, wet seaweed with hollow round fruit that snapped when you squeeze it, and pale, translucent, reddish-yellow jellyfish, which were poisonous and burned your leg when you touched one bathing. "I used to be frightfully stupid, you know," Tony said. "I wanted the bright star out of the jellyfish, so I brought a lot home in my pocket handkerchief and put them on the balcony to dry in the sunshine. When I looked at them again, of course, there was just a big wet spot that smelled of seaweed." The waves whispered rhythmically beside them as they walked, and the salt wind blew full in their faces, streaming over and about them, closing their ears to other sounds and causing a pleasant slight giddiness. They walked in this hushed, whispering peacefulness by the sea, whose every faint murmur, near or far, seemed to have a deep significance. To their left was a... There's our timer, but we'll read this paragraph. To their left was a precipitous cliff of lime and boulders, with jutting corners that came into view as they rounded the bay. When the beach was too stony to go on, they began to climb, and continued upward through the wood until they reached the temple. It was a round pavilion built of rough timbers and boards, the inside of which was covered with scribbled inscriptions and poetry, carved hearts and initials. Tony and Morton seated themselves in one of the little rooms facing the sea. It smelled of wood, like the cabins at the bathhouse. It was very quiet, even solemn up here at this hour of the afternoon. A pair of birds chattered, and the faint rustling of the leaves mingled with the sound of the sea spread out below them. In the distance, they could see the rigging of a ship. Sheltered now from the wind that had been thrumming at their ears, they suddenly experienced a quiet, almost pensive mood.